That was also a good day. I still that's still my main helmet. I find it in all the time.
Yay!
I wish I could find my old helmet. I started off with a Inman starter kit spun dome thing. You tried to make it as pretty as you could, but it served its purpose. It kept you safe, and it made you want to get a really nice looking helmet from Chuck.
Absolutely.
Uh, which I never did. I still got something that it was a rust magnet. I honestly, no matter how much I painted the thing just ate rust. I mean, just it spit out tons of rust.
Now you know how the knights in the Middle Ages, why they had so many squires.
Yeah.
You give them the helmet and your chainmail and everything else. They polish, boys, polish, and then you go have a nap. Yeah, that I remember that very well. Because I mean, all the new steel and stuff that they're making armor out of now, it's okay, good. We had hot roll and cold roll, and eventually stainless, and that was it.
Oh yeah.
So on the topics of helms, I'm just going to go ahead and get us started. As a reminder, this is being recorded and it will be posted to the Historians Chat, the Historians YouTube channel later on. The first question that I had submitted was, did any of you, and I know the answer to this is yes, but I'd like to hear your experiences, did you ever wear a Freon can helm?
Yes, I did. First one I ever had.
Oh.
So what was the difference in the feel and the technology? And I can't even imagine that. I mean, I've seen pictures, but I can't imagine having that on your head. What was that like?
It was just like any other helmet. It's very lightweight. It's 16 gauge
18,
mild steel.
18 gauge mild steel.
Well, it depends on which one you got. If you got one of the high pressure butane type jobs, they were a little thicker. But you had to cut them down.
Carl Knapp had one that was a butane tank, and it was like 12 or 10 gauge.
Yeah, he had a real jewel.
Wow.
Well,
how much did they weigh?
Well, it depended. If a 12 gauge helmet weighs 12, 15 pounds, they're enormously heavy. But at that time, when I first started, there were no armorers in Ansteorra.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well,
none.
That's not completely true. There was me.
Well, yeah, but you lived 7 hours from me,
Very true.
So, I mean, in the steppes area, let me say, there were no armors up here. And I went to a Freon can with strapping over and everything else and got me fighting. But I went looking because I'd seen the Emerald Ferret, who was a kind of a traveling armorer / merchant who would travel throughout the kingdom selling these helms that he made, and they were made of spun domes. So I went looking for spun domes, and I found a company here in Fort Worth called Texas Metal Spinning, and that's how I got started, basically just making helms for all my friends. I never intended for it to be a business. But the first nice helm I had, the spun dome from it was out of a wash basin from a 727 airplane.
Okay, I would not have imagined that.
It really was. It was the bottom of a wash basin, and it was perfect size. So I built a nice little, great helm out of it. I wore that for 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, many years.
First time I ever met Simonn, I was wearing that helm.
The next question I have is, what is the most ridiculous material you've ever seen used for proposed armor construction?
Barrel banding. I think that the metal bands used to be on the that you would sit there and actually close barrels up with. They'd give you these little thin strips. Somebody in my Shire constructed a kidney belt by actually weaving these things together into a sheet, then folding it over. It had a layer of closed cell, and it could wrap completely around you. That thing was bulletproof. Yeah, I had no problem whatsoever. Weight was surprisingly good because I think it's aluminum, so binding it together, it never really dented. The only thing that really kind of stunk about it, because it was a loaner thing, is they kind of spray painted it gold.
I was gonna say that was the gold one, wasn't it?
That was the gold one, yeah. So, but me being in the my choice is either to buy a piece of leather and shape it badly, or to wear this thing. While I was actually first fighting, I wore this thing. So yeah, that's probably the most ridiculous thing I ended up wearing early on.
I've seen a handful of guys when I was first starting. We were all on the road remodeling Walmarts for a living as electricians. Well, they got a handful of these conveyor belts for the old registers, and they cut those into kidney belts and just put padding in them for the loaner armor. And they didn't work at all. Like, it was non-functioning armor. They used them, but it did not protect.
It was about 1/4-inch rubber.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So math weapons just hurt.
I've seen those too.
I've seen multiple people try and build shields out of like actual hardwood, like pretty thick hardwood, and you can hold one of those for a little bit, but actually watching them trying to use it in combat, not so much. Didn't really work. And you try to explain to them, yeah, even back then they'd use a really light wood, like linden wood or something like that, and it's still fairly thin to trap weapons and whatnot. But just so people don't listen until they actually go out there and give it a shot themselves, which is fine. Let's try it out, but it's an object lesson.
I'm about to ask, weren't there people who were actually using weightlifters belts? And
yes, yeah, Lloyd used one of those for years.
Those are still in Amaron loaner armor.
Oof.
Yeah, I still see people use them underneath chainmail or sometimes lamellar.
There was a fighter in the Stargate area that came on the field with a breastplate made out of Venetian blind.
Wait, what?
What?
A breastplate made out of Venetian blind, and his name became Drovak the Blind Venetian.
Oh, Lord.
And yes, it did not hold up. To one hit was all it took, and it came to pieces.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, we tried everything in the world to make armor.
Yeah.
I mean, but when we started, Simon and I started, all you had to have was a basketball pad on your knees and elbows.
Oh man.
No van braces. We didn't wear van braces in Ansteorra at that time. That was it. You had a gorget, a cup, basketball pads, and a helm. And that was legal minimums for us at that time.
We had no van braces at all until we got in several people that had karate background. And there was one man that tried a block on a rattan sword with his forearm, and it shattered the forearm. And that's when we went to hardened leather for the van brace.
So, yeah, but that was it for years. I mean, I don't think I ever fought a tournament with body armor on, other than a kidney belt. We just didn't wear it. It wasn't that hard to call blows that way either. Somebody hit you in the ribs, it's good.
You're calling it.
There were very few that called it light in those days, believe me.
Exactly. We had these big old swords too. I mean, our swords are inch and 3/4, or 2-inch shaved down on the side, and they didn't flex much. Of course, Simon, were used to in the SCA when they were still using those shaped bed slats, oak.
What?
Yeah, early on, before rattan, they got rattan. I mean, I'm talking about in the very early days of the SCA. You take an oak bed slat. You had the nice rounded edges and everything, and you can make a sword out of that. And that's how they started. was with
That was before
beds.
my day.
Yeah.
We had hickory handle axes for a while, till about 69. I mean, 70. Let's see, 69, 70s, mid 70s, all the way through 78.
Yeah.
After that, they said no more hickory handle axes, and from that point on, it had to be rattan.
Well,
So-
rattan was perfect choice.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if it broke, it didn't break sharp. You just didn't have to worry about getting stabbed or cut or have somebody fall on it and impale themselves. And it had good weight, and it was easy to work with if you needed to cut down a handle or whatever, mount a basket hilt. But there was a time when even rattan, you probably remember this, Simon, when you too, Mahdi, when rattan was getting hard to get.
Yeah.
The SCA had grown at that point, just it doubled in size, twice within like a 5-year period. And rattan was scarce. Everybody wanted it. Nobody could get it. That's why we went to fiberglass spear halves. As an alternative to hardwood. They used to use those hardwood halves for a while. They were like, and those things hurt now. But the fiberglass spear had a good weight, and another thing, it didn't break sharp. So, and I think y'all still use them, don't you?
What, fiberglass
spears?
Oh no, yeah, we did. We had to do a lot of work on finding fiberglass. You remember early on during the fiberglass, we had the issue of the fiberglass shafts that were completely circular versus the egg-shaped things that tended to shatter at the wrong time, especially when people started trying to bend them. And they finally codified the specific rules of which type of fiberglass you can actually use.
Yeah, I remember what there were two types. There was a spiral wound, and there was what they call pultruded, which had linear fibers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the one with the linear fibers that we went with. Mm-hmm. I think I was king when Siegfried von Habsburg, who was the marshal of the society at that particular time, okayed those and said, well, we'll use the pultruded. And it has to be at least 1.25 inches in diameter.
That was also an entertaining time. That was entertaining time to learn how to use a new weapon too, because I remember early on they were really we were getting only the people authorized to use it because frankly people didn't have any real control. We were doing some serious damage to each other until we learned how to control the use of the fiberglass spear.
Yeah, we were hitting a little hard, and the heads weren't designed right. You didn't have progressive give, and it was like getting hit with a telephone pole, man. Boom. But it took us a while, but we learned. We figured it all out. And now I love to fight with spear. You know that.
So earlier, it sounded, if I understood correctly, it sounded like Simon said that axes were an experimental weapon. Have there been specific types of combat that have been introduced with specific weapons that were considered experimental in chivalric combat?
Axes were not considered experimental weapons. It was just the axe shaft. They allowed hickory to be used over rattan, and it made it much heavier. It didn't shatter like pine or oak. It would hold truer, but you had to look at them very carefully on weapons inspection to make sure that it wasn't breaking along the grain.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember, other than Morning Stars or the Mason chain.
Yeah.
They outlawed those early on because of the way it could get tangled. on some people on someone's arm, around their neck, whatever. But they got rid of the mace, the mason chain, arm, whatever, Morning Star.
Mm.
Anything. We did get to keep the jointed flails though.
Yes.
But and they also got rid of the pike maul.
The what?
The pike maul. It had a cutting blade on one end and a mace, a mass on the other, and you'd use it like a pugil stick. And you could generate so much power with it, people were getting knocked unconscious regularly.
Well, that leads in perfectly to the next question that I had. What crazy things have you had presented to you trying to pass a weapon inspection that people were claiming were experimental or, you know, the new thing, or what have folks tried to get by?
Punch bucklers. I don't know. See, because I saw it early in my career. I saw a couple people using it. We noticed that members of chivalry really weren't using them. And the people who were using them were frankly being destroyed. The thing had two different problems. First, they only went as only as wide as your forearm. So it tended to have, people had a tendency, one, to put the thing up to actually block shots, one. Second, you've got a thrusting tip close where your hand is. So you're putting your hand in a position where it can actually get hit. When people hit with it, you're really using the mass of your entire body rather than just the mass of the weapon. So when they hit, they tend to hit a little bit too hard. I think it was a combination of all of those factors that eventually had us saying, we don't really want to see this thing being played with. You
remember that round shield with the short sword bolted to it that Riccardo used to have?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
With his arm, it made it a real weapon.
It was, even with a big old thrusting tip on it. You did not want to be on the receiving end of that. It was horrible. But yeah, we made him put it down and not use it.
So was it sort of like a one-armed Mahdi type of thing?
No, I'm talking about, it had a round shield on it that was about 24 inches in diameter.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
And it was already heavy. And then he had that thing bolted onto it. So he would thrust with the shield and the sword at the same time because they were together. And it had so much mass and momentum when it hit you that it knocked you out. It was terrible.
Good Lord.
He was already strong as a bull anyway. He didn't need anything to help him.
Yeah, we've had guys come try to make choppers with hardwood, not knowing the SCA rules with their tan and whatnot, and show with practice, and say they watch videos on how to make them and stuff, so they're okay. And of course, we fail all those things, but just couldn't imagine breaking something like that over somebody's head and sticking them with the shards or whatever.
Didn't Yordi used to use a war pick?
Yeah, he had a war pick.
That thing was what? 12?
we made him put that down too.
But not a Penzic, because I heard those stories of Penzic, him going fishing.
Well, he didn't hit with the pick. He just hooked shields with it.
Yeah.
But if somebody wasn't calling blows, yeah, he might turn that pick loose.
Yeah.
So by a show of hands, which of you gentlemen has been the Kingdom Knight Marshal?
That'd be
okay.
Two people. That's good.
I'm supposed to ask the Kingdom or Earl Marshal, quote, just to see their eyes twitch. What were your thoughts on the lead-filled tennis ball flail experiment? I have no idea what that is.
I haven't heard about this one specifically, but I'll guess. So taking a tennis ball, filling it full of lead just to give it some weight, and then putting some sort of flexible device between it and the stick. Sounds like a horrible idea for a number of reasons, not the least of which is you're using lead in something, so that way if it was to split and go flying around, you're now going to have lead in the air and potentially getting into someone's eyeball or nose or swallowing it or whatever. So probably a bad idea. That in, our conventions say specifically you are not allowed to use metal in any form related to the striking surface. Now, granted, the lead would be inside the tennis ball, but it's still, I would say, part of the mass, the main mass of the weapon. That's why you can use a metal cross guard or metal basket hilt on a sword, but that's not the striking surface. That's not where you're trying to import the force into your opponent. So it's just I'd say that's a bad idea for many, many reasons.
Hrafn, was that particular weapon, was that before the siege ammunition issue? The one where the people put the rebar inside of the tennis ball and sand?
They did what?
Okay, this is a Gulf Wars. This has to be Gulf Wars 5, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
We were letting the siege engines actually make their ammunition, but if you know siege engine ammunition, you generally have that stuff pretty well taped up. And when you're expecting it, you just see like tennis ball bound or whatnot. It just so happens we had one bit of ammunition that it either broke or somebody cut the thing open. But what they found when they cut it open was rebar and sand, because the people making this, they weren't pleased with not getting calls from people getting hit with tennis balls. They wanted people to get hit and really call it. Nobody ever claimed that ammunition, because it was also the time when people weren't marking their ammo.
I know exactly who it was, and he was from Trimaris, but I'm not going to tell you the name.
Okay, but frankly, after that, there were very specific rules of what you can put inside the siege in your ammunition.
Yeah, I remember the early arrows too, the ones that would actually, if they hit you, they would compress and go through your visor slot.
Mm.
Yeah, started with rabbit blunts. And they go right through, it's really funny seeing a guy laying on the ground in the middle of a melee with an arrow sticking out of his eye slot. It's makes things kind of stop for a second.
My understanding is
through his eye.
My understanding is that Locac still uses rabbit blunts, but that's also why they require people to have perf plate in their helmet, because that obviously is not going to penetrate that.
Yeah, I remember when Baldar basically create that egg-shaped arrowhead.
Baldar blunt.
Yeah, Baldar blunt. It had the unfortunate quality to it where when it struck, the shaft would actually begin to propel, basically do a propeller thing. It almost put out the eye of Her Majesty Callantir during the Ravine battle. And it was shortly after that they started requiring archers to put anti-bounce back device on the back of their shafts. So even in the weird off chance now that you end up with something spinning, you don't have to worry about those things going through grills. I also remember there was talk at the time about requiring that all heavy weapons combatants fight with perf face plates. I know the prevailing thought was we outnumber the archers. If we're going to do a modification and actually make somebody pay for it, you shouldn't make the majority of participants change up what they're doing. Make the people who are the minority alter what they're using. So it's the reason why the archers now have to have those things on the back of their shafts, even though chances are very low those things are going to actually go through your grill.
Well, combat archery was probably one of the hot button topics that we dealt with for so many years,
Especially when Trimaris started amping up their bows to shoot harder. There was one year I was part of a group laying siege to the castle. My Squire Uther was standing beside me, and the ones behind us, we started taking hits to the shield, and somebody said, "Uther, I can see holes through your shield." And sure enough, the bolts had knocked in 3/8 inch plywood, holes that were bending the plywood back, and you could see openings this size in the shield. I had Uther take the shield to the Earl Marshal, and the Earl Marshal went bananas.
So for those of you who have been Crowns, which is all of you,
Yeah.
at any point during your reign, was a new set of rules proposed that you had to consider the long-term effects of whether or not it would be in the best interest of Ansteorra and armored combat in our area to allow and to encourage experimentation with?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It
So,
will-
go ahead, please.
Mine was when they started using the Schlager. This was in the rapier combat when they had the foil and the epee, but they wanted to use the Schlager, and that fell to me to decide whether or not they could. Yeah, that's the only time. I know there's a lot of new stuff out there that people are using, the cut and thrust type things that I never even saw before. So, but I had to deal with that, help them write armor regulations and the whole thing that everybody could live with. It wasn't a big deal, but the Schlager had no flex, and I was very much concerned about the small tip on them putting a rib through a lung. Otherwise, it was pretty straightforward.
This reign, the kingdom decided to go to society standards on chivalric armor, and the only thing is, we had, like, my opinion to our Earl Marshal was that we retain forearm protection in Ansteorra. There are some kingdoms who throw light enough and whatnot that they can choose not to wear forearm protection, but I felt that our kingdom would just get all of the broken arms if we went that route. And so we still have forearm protection in Ansteorra.
I believe it was during my second reign when we were reevaluating the safety and feasibility of a flail type weapon, because for a long time the rule was you could not have a flexible component of the weapon. So Count Romanius was doing the experiments, and he did it in a very ritualized, very step-by-step fashion, and we were able to prove that things can be made safely, assuming the flexible section is only a certain amount of length, because the main problem was getting one like wrapped around someone's arm and like jerking their arm out of socket or something like that. So we found that they could be safe. They're just not very effective, because in period, hitting somebody with one of those is because you're taking that big heavy mass and accelerating it by shortening the arc of curve very, very significantly. Well, in our game, those heads are so light, even though you're accelerating it many times over, you're still not hitting with very much authority, and it just felt like you're just getting something glancing off of you.
I know that when he was experimenting with it, the biggest problem was that if you hit any portion of the body that didn't have metal, you probably got a pretty good call, because it did slap you pretty seriously. But anything with metal, it really didn't feel like anything was touching you. And so you end up with somebody, being frustrated about, why, no, I'm hitting you, but why aren't you calling? You called this time, you didn't call it that time. Well, I didn't call because you hit me in the head and this thing just skipped off, as opposed to you hit me in the freaking arm or in the side. Just the inconsistency of the weapon makes it difficult to actually deal with.
Yeah, we were playing with those flails in Romanius's backyard a handful of years ago, and he had finally got in his mind, the material correct that he wanted to use, those little plastic hockey disc looking deals. And the one time one came unattached from the flail in mid swing, I mean, it was like a fastball coming off that deal. I mean, if that had hit somebody in the crowd or whatever going 80 miles an hour, it'd have been not okay.
Well, the reason that we use lanyards it was from our years in Atenveld, when a sword came out of a fighter's hand, flew across and hit the herald right between the legs, and he was standing right beside the king of Atenveld. So from that point on, Atenveld used lanyards.
So I'm hearing that brave herald bravely jumped in front and saved his king.
Yes, he did.
Your Excellency Jan, while you were Kingdom Earl Marshal, did you have any particular experimental weapons or armor situations that arose during that time?
Well, the problem I had was the other way around from what everybody else here is talking about. We had lots of people who wanted to do things. The concept of a flail weapon was kind of almost every backyard group wanted to make one. And the Earl Marshal Society just had horror of it. Just nothing flexible whatsoever. End of, quote. I remember Tom the Traveler, when he was king, came to Ansteorra, and he just, and in those days, the king had enough clout that everybody goes, sure, right. That somebody walked up to him, he's in Namron, and said, I made this flail and I think it's safe, And he said, well, it's against the rules, but I'll give you dispensation today. And he used a hubcap buckler and a dagger against the guy with his flail, and fought. It was fun, but I had a staff flail somebody at Stargate made, and they had tried and tried to get it approved, and it had rubber just as a little floppy piece on it. They wouldn't do it. They finally gave it to me, and I took it. I talked to the Earl Marshal of the Society, and no flexible weapons. End of quote. So I took it and I used the shaft to make a nice sword that I used later on. But it was and the archery and everything else. For the most part, it was. I was dealing with people in Ansteorra wanting to be too creative, and the society at large saying, no, you must never. Of course, we weren't a Kensic kingdom. We didn't have our wars were negotiated each time we did it. And then you'd have the problems. I remember negotiating with Laurel and Darksbane. No problem. We were on the same page. We agreed to how it was going to be. Then King Hugo showed up, and no, everything's going to be mid-realm way. Where people have to be authorized in the mid-realm to fight our fighters. And, Sigmund wouldn't have any of that. This is in Ansteorra. But like I say, the problems that I was confronting in my time were just kind of the other way around, and part of it was, as I say, all our wars were negotiated each time we did it, and not a set war, that would go on for a week. It usually be a long weekend, and most of the time, with the few exceptions, Hugo notably, everybody was pretty cooperative. I know Inman had to cancel one with the Outlands because they were being a bit of pills about things. But I never had anybody putting metal weights in things. That was just a no-no when I was doing it. And yeah, I remember Riccardo, he had illustrations of Renaissance Italy where they had even cutting blades attached to shields, and he wanted to recreate it. As far as I knew, he never used it very often and was pretty much shut down pretty quickly after he tried to show up in tournaments with it. Mostly he'd go in the backyard and try to hit me with it.
So from an Ansteorra out in the world perspective, going to wars, Gulf Wars, Kensic, etc., have we had any experiences where other kingdoms are using experimental things and that caused some interkingdom anthropology issues or anything like that?
At least nowadays, when it comes to interkingdom events like that, experimental weapons are just verboten. They're just, you can't use them. The only way that you can is under very tightly controlled experimental like demos. Like for example, when we were bringing the new rapier spear up through the process about 4 or 5 years ago, probably less than that, about 3 or 4 years ago. Anyways, we got a special dispensation to have kind of a demo fighting event off to the side after one of the battles, and we had 10 or 12 of these things out there, and we demoed them to folks. And by the way, nice mug. I've got one too.
Thank you.
We demoed it to folks to give people a chance to opportunity to use them, and basically just get some real good feedback. And from there, people loved them, and now they're approved, and it's all great. But again, we had to get like special permission to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, the only experience I've had with that is some kingdoms, I don't know if it was allowed or people just got away with it, is on their one-handed swords, they would have a butt spike under the basket at golf war and pickup fights. And so they would try to get in real close with the shields and then just poke you in the face with a little butt spike on the bottom of the sword. And I don't know if that actually breaks any of our rules, but it's real unconventional, like no one does it. And so it's not in front of the hand as far as punching. So, and you're allowed to have butt spikes on mass weapons. So I didn't know if it was actually a breach of the rules or just a gray area.
We'd have to check the Gulf Wars conventions to see if those are allowed. I believe they're not, but I'd have to double check.
So is there anything, I do not have any background with combat whatsoever, so please forgive my absolute ignorance. Is there anything that Ansteorra does combat-wise that just isn't conventionally done anywhere else that we've developed over time?
No, we're fairly close to SCA standards, and even more so now, as His Majesty referenced earlier. There isn't much that this kingdom's been known for that's too wacky, at least not since I've been really paying attention to the last decade or so.
The only two things that I get comments on a lot from around the known world is in our crown tournaments, we have bigger shields than most kingdoms on average, the 2x3 rectangle shields. And then of course, Duke Miguel's shield got a lot of comments around the known world for its size. And then we have a history of asking people to yield in combat in tournament, and that's not done in the known world. Like if you wound somebody in combat, asking them to yield is kind of an Ansteorran tradition, and so people are all kinds of interviews. People ask me about that. Okay. That's really it.
In the early days, when I say early days of when we were still part of Aytenvelt, 1979, Aytenvelt had a war with the Middle that was fought in Ansteorra out in West Texas. And at the time, the mid-realm did not require chin straps on helmets. And we had a number of issues in the battles with the helmets coming off. One of my squires at the time used a greatsword, and when he withdrew his greatsword back, it caught the lip of a helmet, and suddenly the helmet sails up into the air in the middle of the melee. And you can imagine the scream and the fetal position that the man went down real quick. After that, the mid-realm adopted chin straps.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about Ansteorrans generally wear forearm armor. Is that just because we as in the fighting community, not we as in me, hit harder than other kingdoms?
Not most kingdoms. So like Atlantia, West Kingdom, On Tier, and stuff like that, they still have pretty solid calibration. But some of those kingdoms don't aim for the arm as part of their tradition. Okay. And then in other kingdoms like Calantir, Meridies, they're wearing less armor and not throwing as hard on average. Okay. And so the forearm isn't as much of a risk. But okay. if you're fighting here in Ansteorra, especially against some of the more competitive guys where the arm is definitely a target, I don't feel that they get blasted in the arm.
Well, when we
that was an evil look, Hrafn. That was a very evil look.
When we established the forearm protection, you have to remember that people were coming in from a karate background, and they were accustomed to throwing up the forearm to block an incoming shot. And against a rattan stick, you're going to have broken bones. And that's what we started seeing very quickly. And so to counteract that, Ansteorra went to forearm protection.
Okay.
Well, that's
I remember, I remember
untested karate background. I would suggest that the larger shield size being common is the reason why people get hit on the arm more. When a person's using a small shield, an average fighter has more target area to visualize. They, you know, if they're not good enough to visualize it without being, you know, having something to look at. And that arm coming out from behind the shield is the one thing that's readily available to hit. And I think that's the reason why arms are hit more often. Because I found from an extensive karate background, I could do perfectly good blocks and stuff, but it wasn't blocking the business end of the sword. It was blocking at the hand or near the hand, you know, brushing and things. You know, but yeah, there's a lot of SC people with a little bit of karate knowledge, and a little bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing.
It is that.
I distinctly remember one of my weird encounters with this idea was going to Gulf War one year, playing with people on my kingdom, in this case, some fighters from Ansteorra, who apparently they had a style at the time. The nickname was Iron Chicken Wing. Actually put your arm in front of your head, and that was the start position. Apparently, according to your kingdom customs, an arm that was not in motion could not be struck. However, an arm that moved could be struck. So the idea was they'd approach you close enough until they got well within range, then they'd actually try to fling shots at you. Of course, if you don't know this, you're hitting them just flat out in the forearm, and they're looking at you like, this doesn't, you know, you're not supposed to do this. Fortunately, they are wearing forearm protection. So yeah, you have, after hitting the forearm, you have a talk, and after a while, you come to agreement as to what you're going to do. But that's one of the, you know, that's one of the weird things I've ever encountered with somebody deciding forearms couldn't be struck.
Yeah, I remember doing pickups with somebody at Gulf Wars a number of years ago where I tagged this guy in the arm a couple of times and he didn't call it. And after the second or third time, I was like, am I hitting you in the arm? And it's like, yeah, but I don't have to take those. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, you know, it's not possible to hit somebody in the arm hard enough for them to have suffered a wound. And I was like, okay, click, 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 let's go.
Well, let's see here.
That sounds like a foolish thing to say.
It was.
Did he take the next time you
Yes,
struck him in the arm?
He did.
I would imagine so.
That makes me happy.
Yeah, I think at least in the early days, Ansteorra really had the ethos of we're trying as much as possible to recreate the actual skills that weapons use, and not to make rules and play the rules, but try to recreate what we say is going on here, you know, about with this kind of weaponry.
When the way it was explained to me, and Lloyd explained this to me, was that we in our tournaments and practices and stuff, we're for all intents and purposes using wasters, whalebone wasters, I believe is what he called it. And he said, and anything above the knee is a legal target, except the hands. And that's how he that's what he told me. He said, front, back, side, doesn't make any difference. If it's above the knees and above the wrists, hit it.
That's how we did it. I agree.
Exactly how we did it.
Well, the one caveat was you don't target the hand. You could hit anywhere, but you were not supposed to target the hand. In
That's
other
right.
words,
Yeah,
you're going
that's right.
in, you're
That's true. You'd call a hand blow. Just in theory, you weren't trying to hit it.
Well, if you stuck it out there and it got hit, you better call that.
So have any of you as individuals been part of a formal experimental combat or armor program? And if so, could you talk about that?
Yeah, I was. I was taught, mentioning before the time when rattan was getting harder and harder to come by.
Mhm.
And we were looking for new materials to make swords out of. And I went through 15 or 20 different combinations of materials to try and make a sword that was basically not going to kill someone, but wasn't going to break. Like somebody said, well, we use PVC, you put wood in the middle, it'll break. PVC shatters and it's sharp. I tried a gas pipe. It was made out of polyethylene and was just totally impervious to breakage. But to find the right core for it was almost impossible. I went through every kind of plastic derivative I could find. I went through bamboo, rattan, like the small diameter rattan, like 1 inch, which we could get very easily. Was fine, but it was too flexible. So I took about 6 months out of my life and went through working with the Society Earl Marshall trying to find a sword. And I wasn't alone. And most all the other fighters, other kingdoms had fighters of one kind or another who were experimenting as well. And we never came up with anything that was reasonable.
About 6 or 7 years ago, this product hit the market called Fiberflex, I believe, or Fiberfix. It's this material that starts out flexible. When you soak it in water and wrap it around something, it becomes a hard fiberglass type material. And it was proposed that we use this as a replacement for a Siloflex wrapped sword, something to extend the life of the rattan. I mean, it sounded like a good idea. So we said, yeah, let's just try it out. So I made, I don't know, half a dozen sticks of this stuff and passed them around to a whole bunch of folks. And I mean, it didn't eventually turn into a real thing, mostly because it was pretty expensive. Like, we did the math and it extended the life of the stick, but to wrap a stick in this stuff, it actually cost more than it would be to just buy more rattan. And a couple people had a little bit of complaint about, like, if this stuff broke, what would happen. I actually ended up taking a sword and smashing it against the sharp edge of a steel anvil, like 50 times until it cut through. And even then, like I said, it was some sharp bits, but I had to hit it against a steel anvil 50 times in order for it to happen. So it was an experiment. We tried it and just wasn't successful.
My favorite ones that we've done in the last handful of years was the 1 layer foam thrusting tip or the layer of leather thrusting tips. And in my opinion, I wish we could have got at least one of those passed. I like having the lower profile or no profile thrusting tips on weapons.
I thought the single one did pass.
From what I understand, we're still using the half-inch thrusting tip minimum.
Because I was always using the single layer.
Oh, well.
I'll go back and check.
Maybe it has. I'm not sure, but I like the idea of the leather only thrusting tip. I felt it made fighters control their shots, and people finally started calling body thrusts. Because for years, like, getting people to call, some of us have some bellies, and then of course body armor. It's hard to call a foam thrusting tip to the body, or at least in my experience, getting people to call the shot was very difficult. But with the 1 layer leather, like, everyone called it. It was good times.
In early Ansteorra, 77-ish, we had a lot of actual weapons testing, and like we would get together 20 or 30 people with various kinds of armor, actual steel swords, to see what the damage would be to armor, to helmets and whatnot. The only thing that we could pierce a 16 gauge helmet was with the spike end of a halberd. So if you hit somebody that hard to penetrate it that much, it would take the head, back concussion wise, and you wouldn't be fighting anymore. So we patterned a lot of what we did in terms of weapons usage from those early tests. It made a big difference.
I had, well, one slight on the thrusting tips. When I was first fighting, you couldn't thrust with a sword. A short sword was a thrusting sword, and there was a limited length on it. What they defined as a broadsword for the SCA wide rules, you basically had to put a spear tip, and spear tips in those days were like
4 inches.
really big around, and it was just totally awkward and totally useless.
What your sword looked like was a Q-tip.
What?
What your sword looked like was a huge Q-tip.
Yeah.
And it was ungainly because it changed the balance of your weapon.
But one thing that I was involved with while I was Earl Marshal, everybody wanted to have combat archery, and I had more different styles of arrows and combinations presented to me. It'd be almost every week I'd go to another event and somebody'd have their idea on the arrows and things that are going to work. And I remember one time they were having, it was a melee event, and they came out and showed me, and they had the guys stand there and they all shot arrows at them, and it didn't hurt anything. And I tested them and I cut some open and all that. And the problem was marshaling it, because I said, okay, arrows are shot once and that's it. They have to be re-instructed before they can be used again. And in the course of the very next melee, after going down the line and repeating that to everybody, there's a guy with a leg wound on the ground, guarding a pile of arrows, and a bunch of archers dancing around him, trying to go in and grab one before he could tag him with his sword. It is like, you can't pick them up and use them, and they all acted dumb or acted mad, when I said that. It's just, anyway, I was involved with a lot of testing with a lot of different kind of arrows. Right now, I thought I'd play with it, and I shoot thumb draw with a bow. And with their anti-penetration device, you can't do a thumb draw. And they have a ½ inch of draw, back, and my fingers are too fat. I can't put the arrow on the string and draw it. And besides that, they got such a short length that, what they're using right now is, leastwise, the ones that the archer people are showing me are useless. I hope they've got better stuff they're using at the wars, but people out of bring that, and some people up in Eldern Hills were, showing me their stuff and trying, and I couldn't shoot those, I can pull a pretty heavy bow, but using these little dinky things I can't see why people even enjoy that. And they won't let you shoot with a shield, which with a thumb ring, that's one of the things I'd love doing. You make a Calcan style shield, and you got your bow in that hand, and you can shoot. And if somebody gets close, you let it slip and center grip it. It's the way it was done. It's just, of course, like I was saying about Riccardo, that was the way I tended to do everything, was look at something historic and try to make it work. I remember a guy from the East Kingdom telling me, oh, that wing shield, I see, you devised that so that you could cut off this blow and that blow. And I went, no, I found pictures and illustrations of an actual shield, tried to figure out how it was used. And I rounded the corners on it so nobody get hurt. And anyway, especially with the archery, everybody's trying to play the rules. And I really still like the aesthetic of trying to gain skill with medieval weaponry, you know?
Yeah, I remember Simon had a shield that looked like a rabbit.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
And put his head right in the middle of the two ears.
Yeah, he had two big old ears sticking up on the
Think of a
side.
standard heater with ears. And that was because of a fighter named Sir Francois Louvant out of Meridies. He had a snap blow that was so fast, a normal fighter could not stop it. So I figured if I had a projection up on each side, I could take out one major offensive blow that I wouldn't have to worry about, and it worked. So I kept the shield.
I thought you just wanted to be able to see your opponent and still be able to block your head.
No.
No, I was gonna tell that Francois story on you if you didn't tell it.
I was a brand new knight, went to Meridies. We had a 10-man melee team, and I was given standard guard because I was the brand new knight. He walked across the field, killed 9 men to get to me, and the fight lasted 3 blows, all his, and I was down. And I drove home 3.5 hours and figured out, how did I block his blows? So I raised an ear on one side of my shield and an ear on the other side of my shield. So he had to work 3 times as hard to get it out.
Did it work?
With everybody except Francois. He was just too fast. In the old days of 16mm film, they had pictures of him, his snap blow, out and back in 3.5 frames. And they were blurred. He was that fast.
So one of the other questions that I was sent in, I don't actually understand the context for, so maybe you guys can help. What is a thistle missile?
We just got done with this. We're up here working on a friend of ours' house at Sir Asaph, and they brought these thistle missiles out of storage, and we shot a couple at the trash dumpster that we're using to haul off material. And it's an old arrowhead that they use for before the Baldar blunts, and it's a hard rubber head, and on the inside of it, it has this little a secondary rubber head on the inside. But the difference between it, like a Baldar blunt and the thistle missile, is in the inside cylinder that where the fiberglass attaches to the bolt head. There wasn't a solid cap that kept the shaft from going through. And so they said that it was possible that when the arrow struck hard enough, eventually the shaft could go through the arrowhead, which would make it a hazard to people.
Okay.
Not to mention thistle missiles hit like a rock. The heads didn't give like the regular arrowheads.
No.
That's still a concern with even modern heads. It can still happen. Like I remember a number of years ago at Gulf Wars, I got shot in the arm with an arrow, and I didn't really think much about it. But when I was taking off my armor later, there was a perfectly round bruise on my arm with a puncture wound right in the center, meaning whoever shot me, their shaft had punched right through the head. So that's why before every battle, all those arrows get inspected, both to make sure that the shaft is attached and that it's not protruding from the end.
The actual thistle missile question was, thistle missiles, are they fluffy tickles or spears of doom?
Yeah, they're not. They're murder weapons. Yeah, people were complaining that they were saying that thistle missiles, they're shooting them from across the field, and they were hitting their line, and it sounded just like a normal arrow hitting, and then eventually like it would hit and then slowly come back off the shield, and they're saying that the fiberglass would go through and start trying to stick into the wood shields. So thank God I wasn't around for those days. I would not have been a fan.
Well, you guys are getting to use fiberglass shafts now. In the beginning, all we could use was wood.
The wood shafts?
Now wood is illegal. You can't use it in.
Yeah, that's all we could use was wood in the beginning.
Right, all it was used. In fact, Zane had dents in his pauldrons from the shafts hitting his pauldrons.
Oh, yeah, well, they used to have to tape the arrow. They used to have to tape the shaft from end to end with strapping tape.
Yeah.
And, so if one broke, the tape would hold it together, which I thought was a pretty good idea, actually.
So His Majesty partially answered the next question already, but for the rest of everyone, and in case he has additional commentary, what experimental weapon did not pass and was not granted permission to be used that you wish really had?
So His Majesty Lachlan, right before my reign, and maybe even a reign or two back, was working on experimental archery heads for bows, and they were a UHMW core with a cane tip around the outside as the rubber protection, and it would make the cost of archery like a quarter of the price it is right now for anyone to pick up archery. And we did a bunch of experiments and tests on them, and I felt they were super safe, but for whatever reason at the time they weren't passed.
So I can speak to that a little bit because I was Earl Marshal when all that was going down. We pushed those pretty hard to try and get them accepted at a Gulf Wars a couple of years ago. Even as an experimental, they were done the experiment got started too late. It wasn't enough time for the person who was the Society Missile Marshal at the time to accept them. His Majesty is correct. Those things would significantly reduce the cost of combat archery, meaning we get more archers on the field. Last I heard, they were never disallowed. It's just the experiment wasn't being pushed anymore. Because the person who was Society Marshal at the time said he thinks that there was merit in the idea, and we very much should try them out to see that in fact they were safe and everything else like that. I just don't know if whoever was going to be leading up the charge, as it were, just didn't submit the paperwork or whatnot.
Gotcha. I do want to see that one pass still, because right now archery's too expensive for your average person to play.
Yeah, me too. And these particular tips, they are really heavy because it is the tip for a cane. So your arrows are actually less performant, meaning they don't fly as far and they're slower. But they're just a hell of a lot cheaper, like a fifth the cost or something like that.
Hey, Hrafn?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the crutch tip arrows, you might want to talk to Vincente about it, because in the end they got pushback, I think, from the Society Missile Marshal. That was pretty much just like, not no way, not no how, this isn't happening. And in the end they ended up building the test rig that they put in place that's been prescribed for being able to test the arrows. They shot the prescribed number of arrows at it, and it did bend back the metal bars for it, but it's because their test rig was like the metal bars of a helmet, but with a 12-inch width and flat bars, and it just dented them in, which, if you think about it, most combat helmets are not flat, they're arched. And the problem is they only built one test rig, but we thought even using a thrusting tip under that kind of test rig wouldn't work. It's part of the difficulty is we have all these people that keep on wanting to try to play material scientists and be engineers, and in the end they just want things to stay the way that it is. And if you try to talk to them about physics and materials and things like that, they're just no. And so then you have to turn around and go back and say your test rig is BS, and here's the reasons why, which starts a whole nother level of fight. Or you can just be I'm going to wait a little while until that person's not in charge anymore, and then I'm going to go talk to somebody else.
Yeah.
So last I heard, that's actually where that's sitting at, because we're still sitting on a bunch of crutch tips. We want to arm the masses, because there's nothing more fun than watching people walk back to the res point.
Making the enemy fight in the shade, as it were.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it gives me those big medieval feels whenever you have somebody that's the ink on their authorization card still somewhat wet, but they have practiced this crossbow a whole lot. And they go out there and you got Duke Spear God out there, and that they shoot him with a crossbow. And it's you should have learned to hide behind your shield. Now you get to walk. And so then I get to recreate and hearing them complain about how this is not fair, and then you read the earlier treatises about how this is not fair. This is how I recreate the better part of the Middle Ages. So it's important.
I'll try not to take that personally when you're talking about, Duke with a spear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm offended.
But if you're saying that there is a chance or maybe something's changed, that would be cool.
Well, so yeah, I was basing that based on, because this was one society marshal back,
Yep.
Gravesend. So he stepped down, I don't know, right before Corona, I think.
Well, that's great, because right now is the best time. We're not having fighter practices. We're not having events that are getting in the way. Like, now is the best time to build and test stuff.
Well, Gravesend wasn't against the missiles. He actually liked them. I think it was the missile marshal who was in charge, and I don't remember her name. So I don't know if that role has turned over yet.
Okay.
Hey, Jan, do you remember what the first arrows that showed up in any melee were made out of?
First ones I saw were wood with the strapping tape on them, like
Remember the golf tubes and the tennis balls?
Yes.
oh, the golf tubes and tennis balls. I saw those, but nobody ever really used them. Some people tried to make them for war engines, but they flew bad. They didn't hit very hard.
Last I heard, those are still required in Callantir. Like, Callantir has not gone to shafted arrows yet.
So I thought they did last year, or they were doing the experiment last year.
Okay.
To go to regular arrows.
Oh,
But yeah, they were using golf tubes last year.
You could actually catch a golf tube arrow by the shaft.
Yep.
It was really fun. Catch it, throw it down, shake your finger at the archer, and then chase him.
Yeah, apparently there's a contingent of older fighters in Callantir that is just vehemently against shafted arrows. Like, they are convinced that everybody's going to get punctured in the eye every single time one gets fired, which is why they haven't ever gone to shafted arrows.
You got to keep in mind also, remember the Baldar blunt incident? That did involve Callantir coming to Gulf Wars. And not kidding when he said Her Majesty almost lost her eye, because when that back of that shaft went through the grill, it cut her underneath her eye. That would be part of their experience.
Gotcha.
Well, one incident can change something, but should it? I was at Penzic and came upon a line, and the guy on the end threw this low rising blow, and his sword tip hit the ground. And he knocked about a 3/4 inch pebble, like a bullet, went straight through my face grill. Hurt like hell. No, and I'm going, who's shooting guns? But it was nobody's fault. He just hit the ground. We're kind of on the hillside. He threw that low rising shot, hit the ground, and fired that thing right through my face grill.
This might be a shock to everybody here, but combat is a contact sport.
Yeah.
What?
You can make something or try to make something just as safe as you possibly can, but somehow, some way, somebody can get hurt with it.
Well, and that really comes down to the heart of why we do experimental weapons. It's to try things out to see if we can find things that are maybe more medieval, or to encourage our fun or whatnot. But we also have to go through the due diligence to make sure that weapon experiments aren't to make sure that they're going to be effective. It's to make sure they're going to be safe. Because you can have weapons that are, very, very safe but ineffective, like I mentioned the flails earlier. But if they're effective and not safe, sorry, we can't use them. There's a reasonable amount of risk, basically.
Something that His Excellency Jan has mentioned in a couple of our conversations about older combat is he said that the attitude in Ansteorra has always been not so much of, I know the rules, I have them on the inside of my shield, I've memorized them, the rules keep me safe, but that your fellow combatant keeps you safe. And that's a different mindset that Ansteorra has, that other kingdoms perhaps don't adhere to as strongly, that they believe that the rules are there to keep them safe. And we believe that the person that you're fighting is there with the intent of having fun, same as you, and that relationship on the fields between combatants is part of what keeps people safe. Would you agree with that?
I'd say it's
I
a
would.
mix. I mean, because especially in interkingdom events, I'm finding somebody from Trimaris Counts here, the West, Antir, who the hell knows what. I might not know them from Adam, and I don't know, just from on a human interaction perspective, I don't know this person, so how do I know if I can trust them or not? I mean, yes, we're all here to have fun, but at the same time, there's differences between each kingdom. That's why we have interkingdom anthropology. Some kingdoms hit harder than others based on weather or just history. So I'd say it's not an either or situation, it's an and situation.
Mhm. Your Majesty, it sounded like you were starting to say something on that topic.
Oh, I was about to say close to the same thing Hrafn was getting at. Is it's a big mix, both fighters are absolutely responsible for the safety of both fighters and the crowd at all time, and you see it a lot where if I feel my opponent is unsafe for any reason, I stop the fight to help out and make sure, for a bunch of reasons, that he could be unsafe or whatnot, or the fight could be unsafe. So I do think that we do worry about that a lot, but it's definitely on both fighters.
So this
I
is,
wouldn't want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say this isn't on the topic of the evening of experimental combat, but have any of you ever experienced a moment in a tournament fight in which you felt that your combatant was being unsafe and you were able to resolve that in the midst of what was going on?
For me, it's never really been as much as my opponent was unsafe or being unsafe, but it's usually something like my opponent's armor failed and they didn't know it and the marshal didn't catch it, so I would stop the fight. Or thrusting tip would come off, so I would let them know that they don't have one, or something along those lines. And people have done the same thing for me. My elbow cop got knocked off at a tournament Warlord a handful of years back, and my opponent at the time, Timo, stopped me and said, "Hey man, your elbow cop's unlaced," and I would have had no idea. And if I got crushed in the elbow, I'd have had a pretty bad day. So, but not my actual opponent being unsafe. I haven't had that problem yet.
As a marshal, there's been several times where I've checked someone's armor just to pull them aside a little bit, say, "You're getting amped up. You need to bring it down a couple of notches," because they were getting way too heated, and you could see it in their face, you could see it in their stance, and it could have gone very, very badly if it had continued on that trajectory.
Well, I think last week, Corwin told a story about me breaking up an actual fight. They were hitting with basket hilts and kneeing each other, and it gotten way out of control. I've seen that happen more than once. We're only human, and you can get heated and lose your temper, or you just don't like each other to begin with, whatever. But being armored does not necessarily make it safe. I know that thrusting tips are a thing now, pretty much, but and Simon, I think, can back me up on this, and Jan too, we didn't thrust each other much in the early days.
No, we didn't.
It was simply because of the idea that the people you are fighting are your friends and your country. And you didn't want to kill them. You just wanted to ring their bell good or bruise their butt, so they can get up and smile and we can go have mead together. The idea of thrusting was a killing blow, literally. You want to put your sword through your opponent. And the idea was that we like each other too much to do that. So we didn't really practice thrusting. Somebody now, even in my prime, if somebody had come along that was good with a thrusting tip, he'd ate my lunch. But I don't know. I don't
think so.
Well, maybe not. Who knows? Anyway, I'd have been at a better disadvantage. But I think it's the concept that Ansteorrans have always wanted to treat each other well on the field. that we've liked each other well enough, or let me crank that back. We like ourselves well enough not to damage our friends. And that was, I think, a lot of what drove our style in the beginning, was that I don't mind smacking you on the butt cheeks with my sword or hitting you upside the head, but I'm not gonna, run you through with it. That may be oversimplification, but I think we just liked each other a lot, and all we wanted to do was club each other, get all dirty, nasty, and sweaty, and then go drink afterward. That was just kind of how we were. I remember Simon and I've had some ridiculously good fights. Went on forever, and when we were through, the ones who weren't throwing up would go buy a beer for the other guy.
True.
That was. I see the fighting nowadays as being very efficient, and it's very brutal to watch some of it. Oh, guys, I'm not trying to offend you or judge you. It just doesn't quite have the pageantry that the old days did. That's all I'll say about that.
I think I'm kind of in the, as weird as it sounds, I'm kind of in the middle. Even if I do seem kind of old, I could appreciate what guys used to do back in the day. I do know that because the technology we're using, wearing a lot of heavy armor just wasn't conducive to surviving back then. When they talk about fighting SCA minimum, that's what we fought in early on. We fought in minimum: helm, gorget, kidney belt, elbow, knee cuff, brace. You didn't want to put much more on than that. You don't have big breastplate. You don't sit there and actually have upper leg protection. Don't do the greave. You don't have that much armor on. In fact, your shield is effectively your armor. When they talk about Ansteorra fighting style back in the day, our shields considered barn doors, but that was the thing you had to get around, and that's what our style, for the most part, was based on. As we started getting better armor because we could afford it, we started reducing the size of our shields, and now we can actually start using far more offensive technique, far more effective offensive technique. It does play off a little bit differently. As a person who's actually fought both and had to reconstruct his style, I appreciate both of them. There are times I wish I could go back to the old defensive style. It was fun. Probably something to keep me alive, but I do actually appreciate a lot of fighting I'm seeing right now, because that stuff is beautiful.
I can relate a story back from the early days. June 24th, 1977, Atenvelt went from California all the way to the East Coast. And the first Crown tournament that was held outside of Phoenix was held in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was a fighter flew in, Sir Michael Longbow, did not bring his armor. He borrowed minimum armor to take the field. And I faced him in the first Crown tournament that I ever fought in. And I drove a blow at his head, and he was very quick, very nimble. He threw back his head to avoid the blow. The helmet came off, and my sword smacked him right square on the bare forehead, knocked him out.
Ooh.
The queen said from the throne, Tertiary of the Falling Stars, "Is he dead?" And she did not mean SCA dead. I dropped at his feet, shocked and stunned. He was allowed to come back to about 5 minutes later, then allowed to come back on the field, and I was afraid to hit him. But in those days, with Atenvelt was so widespread, a night was assigned to every new fighter that was invited to the Crown tournament. Sir Theo of Mitronwood, who was later on king, the king that transitioned us to kingdom. He was the knight that watched me. On June 25th, the next day, in the final court, I was given my knighthood. But I do not recommend hitting anyone on the bare forehead with a sword. It's not a good feeling to see the man go down and not moving.
Yeah, I saw that happen at a fighter practice once. Yeah, not a good thing.
That same story, Duke Jonathan, who was then Squire Jonathan, held the shield over my head to block the sun as I knelt at the knight's feet.
So we have gone through all of the questions that I had submitted for this panel. Does anybody have just general information or background about Ansteorran weapons experiments or armor experience?
There was a story that Mahdi, I think, brought up on my axe. My first weapon in the SCA was a hickory shafted axe. The head of it was tire rubber without the cording cut out so it flexed, but it weighed a ton of bricks. And while it was legal, if you got hit with it, you could cave somebody in. I later made one, a hickory, a rattan shaft with the same type of head, and it was still a monster. It was legal to fight, but not many people wanted to face it.
I had a little mace that everybody called Nasty.
I remember Nasty.
And back then we could use clackers in the mace. I don't know if y'all still can or not. But the problem with a mace is you could hit somebody with it, but the head was soft enough that they wouldn't feel it, so nobody wouldn't hear it. Excuse me. And it made it hard to call, so we put clackers in it. And much like Simon's axe, Nasty was one of those. The one I loved was Riccardo's mace, that one he hung from his wrist when he fought with spear. And you got past his spear point and just charged up. You're dead now. And Riccardo would flip that thing up into his hand and knock you spinning. It was fun. But I don't know. I think we did pretty good for just kind of feeling our way in the beginning. You know, we didn't kill anybody for real. And I think we were diligent enough and careful enough to make sure that what we do take on the field is as safe as we can make it.
So have you ever been involved with a proposed experiment that you just looked at flatly and said, no, this is unsafe, categorically, no, 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 no?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen some really stupid weapons come out there, but you know, you just say, no, ain't gonna work, and let it go at that. And they put it down and didn't use it. I don't think anything that was dramatically unsafe was ever pushed to a point where someone just had to have it. I think we were, like I say, I think we respected each other enough in those days to, if enough of your friends said, oh, you can't use that, then we didn't even try.
I can't say that must have been the opinion of people, the higher ups. There were sometimes people that kind of on the fringes would actually create some weapons that they would kind of fly under the radar, and you wouldn't really be able to catch them until you actually deconstructed them. I think you remember there was a tournament down near Stargate area. It was called Non-Worthies.
Oh yeah.
It's the end of the day. At the time, I'm a squire, Bear's a squire. We're just probably doing our grousing about why can't they sit in the elevators because we're kind of full of ourselves. But as we were sitting on these hay bales, there was a weapon off to the side, and Bear happened to pick this thing up, and he flew around for a little bit. It was an axe, and when he basically pounded a fence post, the fence post shuddered. Boom! And we're going, what the? We looked at it. We checked its weight. I tried it. It went boom. We said, this is a little bit weird. And yes, we did something that's probably not too kosher. We decided to take a knife, but we did cut now it's covered with duct tape. It's fine. But when we cut the sucker open, we find rattan shaft, pine head, leather on the edge. It's a pine head. Okay. Completely, it's not supposed to be. Now, we were able to go to the police that evening, find out who had the weapon. We found out the weapon had been gifted to somebody. So he didn't even know. He just thought it was a beautifully constructed axe. It had good weight to it. It had some stiffness to it that we weren't used to, but it was like, wow. It just comes down to we do trust our friends to construct things according to the rules. When we do get them to check, we're presuming people are going to be somewhat forthright. Fortunately, nobody got injured with it because I can only imagine what's going to happen if somebody really got stung with something that didn't meet spec. No, well, I don't have to imagine. I know what would happen. It'd be R&D City. But yeah, what was that?
I rejected a mace. When you cut into the foam, it had rolled lead around the rattan shaft.
I remember that.
And fighter was told in no uncertain terms, you take it on the field and there's going to be people hunting you. There was a time that Sir Charles Knapp out of the Stargate, Baron Stargate, he had a great sword that would break 2x4s. Needless to say, we didn't let it on the field.
Well, what I never understood, I guess it's been fine, when they went to the, what was a 6-foot unpadded pole arm, where all it had was a thrusting tip. We used to have great swords, that had a thrusting tip. They didn't have any padding on it, but we had a limit of space between our hands, where we could only get a certain amount of leverage on the weapon. You remember that, Simon?
I remember that.
I think it was 12 inches, I believe.
10 inches.
Was it 10?
10 inches.
Okay. But we could only get a certain amount of leverage with an unpadded pole arm. You can put your hand anywhere, you get all the leverage you want. I'm surprised somebody hadn't gotten Babe Ruth with one of those things. Anybody have any comments? I know you guys love to use them.
I mean, been using
that's the way it was.
I mean, it's like anything else. It's if you make sure that the weapon meets the weapon construction, there's a certain amount of maximum weight that these things can actually have, and it's up to the marshals to make sure that they're constructed out of approved materials. You're right. The amount of physics that someone could put into a weapon like that is pretty impressive, and it goes back to the trust thing we're talking about earlier, that we're trusting each other not to try and Babe Ruth somebody's head off their shoulders.
Yeah, in my experience going to Callantyre, padded glaives, because they're capable of having more mass, are actually able to hit harder, especially for like concussive reasons. Unpadded glaives hurt more on flesh, but the padded glaives I feel have more concussive ability.
I agree with that. Yeah, I just wondered because about the time I stepped out, that's when those 6-foot unpadded pole arms came in, and heard everybody raving about them, but I never used one.
Yeah, any weapon, like if you want to hurt somebody with a weapon, you really can. I mean, rattan can really mess somebody up if you want to. And so we all of us train to hit hard, but then we choose not to because we're friends. I mean, at least in my experience.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And again, I think that's one of the positive things that Ansteorra's always had going for it, was that we didn't want to damage each other. I know other kingdoms, they didn't care. I can tell you right now, the East Kingdom doesn't give a crap. I fought with those guys many, many times and listened to them talk. They don't care. They just as soon knock somebody out as look at them. But then again, this is Texas and Oklahoma, so we're nicer down here.
I've got a kind of an experimental thing. It was with the early swashbucklers. They used to not understand why I'd get upset and want a detailed explanation of broken blades. I'd get a report of not much happened at our tournament. There were 3 broken blades, but nothing really serious. And they decided after because I put out a letter every month to all the groups. And they decided that they would educate me because I wasn't part of the swasher community. And this guy brought 2 pieces of trigger. They were trying to say that you just had to have 2 layers of cloth or body armor. And he said, look, I have this broken blade, and it's broken nice and smooth and square. And he said, and to simulate a body, he put it over a sandy spot on the ground, and he stabbed it and beat on it and said, you can't put the sword through it, the blade through it. It is perfectly safe. 2 layers of trigger. And I said, okay, and I walked over to where they had a deck, took their trigger, and I didn't even brace it. I just put it down over a crack in it, took his blade and went quick and went right through it. In fencing, I mean modern fencing, most people who get impaled under the arm, not in the soft belly flesh. The blade will hit a rib or go between the ribs and slide right in. And they were just fixated on, well, it's hot here. We need to, we can do it with 2 layers of, medium cloth. And, it was just simply a matter of, at that point, I rejected that as a alternate to use. I mean, I sent it up to the Earl Marshal and I recommended against it, but it was just so, they had thought that, I tested it severely and they were just beating on it in the soft sand, but as soon as I put it down where it was braced on either side and just had my hand holding it like that, being right through. And a lot of times people look at the weapons that they want to submit or want to use. It seems right to them, but it's not been checked out. In my day, we didn't get to test it. The Earl Marshal, the society said, I have to approve it. I have to test it. You can submit it to me. And with the growth in numbers and the ballooning of Pennsic and other wars, they've allowed, that somebody other than the centralized group. I mean, nowadays it's good. I'm not criticizing this. This is wonderful that you can participate in testing stuff and do the program. I was really hampered by not being able to do it. I could just attach recommendations as it went up the line.
Gotcha.
Am I too far off subject or?
No, you're fine. I had the same, well, not not particularly the same issue, not penetration through the armor issue, but the amount of protection the armor would give to someone when they were fighting with the Schlager. Those things were really rigid, and they hit really hard, and so I had to evaluate that, and I recommended to them, I'll let them play with them, sure. I recommended to them that they use something a little harder around the rib area than just what they were wearing to fight with rapier, with foil and epee. I'm not sure what they ever did with that, but I was afraid somebody was going to get one of those and punch a rib through a lung. Even accidentally, your foot slips, you fall as you're thrusting, and you put all your body mass into it. And next thing you know, somebody's on the way to the hospital. And that scared me a little bit. But that was my concern. I couldn't prove different, because I wasn't going to go out there and punch somebody hard enough in the ribs to prove the point. But I think we did what we could do.
So while this conversation is focused on chivalric armored combat, we are going to have one that's talking about rapier combat. I did want to just kind of briefly touch on this just because we do have such an incredibly experienced panel, and I know a lot of you have had crossover with that community. Is there anything about rapier experiments that you'd like to mention, or do you have questions for that community or things that I can talk to them about to help me sound a little bit more intelligent when I'm chatting with them?
Well, the way that they run experiments for steel fighting is effectively identical to the way that they run experiments for armored. The process is exactly the same. Like I mentioned before, we were talking about I was talking about the new rapier spear. We ran that exactly like it was an armored one. It just happened to be with the rapier field.
Okay. I haven't ever actually seen one of them, so I don't have context.
It's a rattan spear with a injection molded rubberized head that actually looks kind of actual spear pointy. It's got a sphere on the end of it, so it can't penetrate like it would. It's very, very flexible. So it actually, I literally had Centurion Pug hit me as hard as he could in the chest with me just wearing rapier armor, and knocked me back, but it did not do any damage. So these things are incredibly safe. In fact, they have prior to this, the rapier spear was a rapier dagger on the end of an oak shaft, which was, in my opinion, manifestly unsafe, but that was what had been approved a couple of years ahead of time. Now, because these things are so much more safer, the old dagger on a stick is out, and this is the new standard.
Good.
Okay.
And it's really fun to play with.
They are. They're a blast.
Yeah, they're quite safe. I've seen them used a lot.
Okay.
And they've been a game changer for the rapier community, because for the longest time, everybody's melee engagement or range was effectively, the length of your arm. You've now got something that can take somebody out from an extended distance. So it's forced people to start using more shields on the rapier melee field, because that's how you counter the extended range. When beforehand, seeing a shield on the rapier field was pretty rare.
I know there's a lot of complaints about them, but I'm a fan and wish people would use the rubber band guns more often, and even go more towards the rifle route, the ones that hit a little harder. I think the rubber band guns are awesome.
Centurion Alexander had a design for a muzzle loading pistol that shot super balls.
Yeah, the rubber balls.
Yeah, like you'd have to pull a ball out, put it into the gun, shove it down with the stick, so that way it would cock a spring, and then you'd point and shoot. And so it actually took, every round you'd have to pull out another ball, stick it in there, jam it down. So it actually caused your rate of fire to be a little bit more historically accurate.
So cool.
One of those rubber band guns was just sold at a fundraising auction to help an Ansteorran this week. There's a gentleman by the name of Iron Badger from the Armor Archive who I
Yep.
guess is fairly well known for his rubber band guns, and he donated one to help an Ansteorran.
Neat.
That is awesome.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I know him from the archive. But well, I think that pretty much covered all of the planned questions that I had. If anybody wants to jump in, that would be awesome. Otherwise, we can go ahead and close the conversation early if people would prefer.
I'm about out of time, so I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to sit in on this, and I appreciated hearing about the histories and the experiments and stuff from before my time, and I really appreciate you guys being willing to do this.
Thank you so
What
much.
His Majesty said.
Awesome.
Thank
You have
you,
a wonderful
Your
evening, guys.
Majesty, again for suffering through your reign, the extended portion of it.
I really appreciate all the help we've had this reign. It's everybody's come out to make it possible. So thank you guys. And we all have a good one.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
I'm just happy to see Mahdi and Simon's smiling face again. I haven't seen either one of them since coronation, and Jan, of course, last weekend. Glad you guys are doing good.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, I am looking forward to June. Granted, I kind of hate the fact that Warlord's still going to be virtual this year. It'll be 2 years in a row, but I am honestly looking forward to what we probably had going on in June. I honestly think we're going to be able to see each other.
Completely off subject of this call, but I'm starting to put the bug in people's ears that we should totally invade Lily's War and make Lily's War our Ansteorran welcome back party.
What an idea. Oh my
Sounds
goodness.
great.
Thanks for feeding me that one. I'm going to have to seriously consider that one.
Because that's like middle of June, right? Second and third week of June.
Well, does anybody have any clue what the society's going to do time-wise about opening back up again?
They just announced a few days ago that all events are canceled to the end of May. That's what we were just referring to.
Oh, okay. I missed it.
Yeah. It just came out on Saturday, I think, was the announcement, maybe Friday.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So.
Well, we are here every Sunday. We have a different topic each night. Next week is Ansteorran companion animals, whether that be equestrian or famous dogs or hawks or other animals, and how that has enhanced our experience with events here in Ansteorra. So y'all are always welcome back. We're here every Sunday from 7 to 9 generally. We had a really lovely chat last week telling stories about Duke Jonathan, and had a number of folks appear for that. And his family commented on the video and said that they were really touched by the stories that had been told, specifically the ones that you told, Inman, and that they appreciated those stories and remembrances. So thank you for your participation.
You're more than welcome. I'm gonna miss him.
So if you guys have any suggestions for topics for the future, things that would be fun to just come on over and chat about, whether it's broad or narrowly focused, we're always looking for interesting topics to discuss. So feel free to send me a private message on Facebook or via email at zubeda@gmail.com, and that would be wonderful.
And thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Well, then I will go ahead and bid you all good evening. Have a good one.
You too, babe.
Stay safe out there.
Get easy, ladies and gentlemen.